My name is Austin Lawrence, and today I'm going to talk to you about the 1954 Guatemala coup. The 1954 Guatemalan coup was an operation by the CIA to get rid of Guatemala's president, Jacobo Arbenz, and to end the Guatemalan Revolution, which lasted from June 18, 1954 to June 27, 1954. The CIA code name for this operation was called Operation PB Success.
One of Bernays' clients is the United Fruit Company. The American company makes boatloads of money from bananas. In fact, they control the banana trade in Latin America.
The United Fruit Company practically owned Guatemala, and when they didn't like the guy who had just been democratically elected president, they asked Bernays for help.
That new president is this guy, Jacobo Arbenz. He's an army officer and a nationalist, and he's got big dreams for Guatemala.
Arbenz was going to give the United Fruit Company's land to the peasants. So Edward Bernays sold the idea that Arbenz was a communist to the people. The result would get what the United Fruit Company wanted: Arbenz out of power and the land returned to the United Fruit Company.
He uses a front organization to bombard the media with press releases, saying the Soviet Union is going to use Guatemala as a beachhead to attack the United States. He invites prominent journalists to tour the country. And who do they happen to meet? Well, carefully selected local politicians who, of course, confirm the worsening conditions.
Now, having politicians confirming Arbenz's communist activity, the people of Guatemala start to worry and turn on him. The CIA creates a radio station to spread the news and recruit students to distribute thousands of posters of his activity. The reason Bernays could get away with such lies is because Arbenz was operating in the height of the 1950s Red Scare.
Of the propaganda campaign against the Arbenz regime was to create a sense of fear and confusion amongst the general population in the community, destabilize the government, and ultimately force Arbenz's resignation.
Edward Bernays' propaganda campaign against Arbenz sets the wheels in motion. The CIA propaganda campaign finishes the job. Arbenz loses control of the way the world sees him. It doesn't matter if the stories are true or not. Image is everything. For President Arbenz, it's game over.
United States security wanted to prevent Soviet beachhead in their territory, and the Guatemalan government was believed communist, so the CIA believed they had to do something about it. Arbenz committed two sins in the eyes of the Eisenhower administration. First, open system to all political party and recognize the communists, which was odd because he didn't have any communists in his cabinet. And secondly, introduce a new land reform program, which took the land from the landowners and gave it to the peasants. Much of the land taken by Arbenz had belonged to an American firm, the United Fruit Company. They hinted that Arbenz was playing a communist game and he had to go. Eventually, the CIA bombed the capital, forcing Arbenz to flee and quickly replaced him with Carlos Armas. In power, Armas returned all the land to the United Fruit Company, as well as the land from the peasants, and gave it back to the landowners. The government returned to a military dictatorship for the next 30 years, what resulted in over 100,000 deaths of the Guatemalan citizens. Carlos Armas was assassinated in 1957, roughly 3 years after taking office. For the United States, the election of Armas was a successful operation against international communism. The overthrow of Arbenz had added a new and glorious chapter to an already great tradition of American states. Many Guatemalans came to have a different perspective. The new regime rounded up thousands of suspected communists and executed hundreds of prisoners. Labor unions were crushed and United Fruit lands were restored. Guatemalan politics then degenerated into a series of coups and counter-coups, coupled with brutal repressions of the country's people.
Military dictators ruled the country for the next 30 years. The United States provided them with weapons and trained their officers. The communists we saved them from would have been hard-pressed to do it better. Peasants were slaughtered. Political opponents were tortured. Suspected insurgents were shot, stabbed, burned alive, or strangled. There were so many deaths at one point that coroners complained they couldn't keep up with the workload.